Today we're going to be talking about this, which is the brand new Sony 20mm f1.8 G lens, a really quite nice wide angle lens. It's actually a new prime from Sony. It's their widest prime they've made to date. Of course, we've got the 24mm G Master lens, which is a similar kind of focal length, but there are some differences. And actually this lens, of course, is going to be compared to that lens a little bit, but certainly holds its own as well. Let's just talk a little bit about what the differences are between this lens and the 24mm. Of course, has the focal length, but otherwise this is a little bit smaller, it's lighter weight, but otherwise it's a similar design. It's nice and compact. You know, it sits really well on the front of Sony cameras. So whether that's an a7 III, an a7R4, they're the two cameras that I've been using it with, or whether you want to go for something like a crop sensor camera, so an a6400, 65, 6600, it just fits really nicely on the front of the mirrorless cameras because it is so small and lightweight, but still giving you really, really nice quality. Now, sticking with the design of the lens for a second, it's a nice feel to it. You know, it's got a little bit of weight to it, but otherwise it's still lightweight, but without feeling cheap and tacky, if you know what I mean. It feels like it's a good quality lens. Now, you've got an aperture ring on the lens itself, which personally I always really like. You know, it's just a nice thing to have on there, a nice tactile feel to actually changing the aperture. But of course, you've got a declicker as well. So if you want to have nice smooth non-clicking, I was gonna say nice smooth clicking. No, nice smooth non-clicking, then you absolutely can with the declicker. And of course, as you might expect from a lens like this, you've got that little customizable button on the side there. Now, as standard, it comes as focus hold, which actually is really useful, but you can change that to different things as well. In some situations, it might be useful to actually use that like a back button focus, but on the lens. That might be quite a handy thing, but there's lots of different things that you can do with that as well. Otherwise, the lens itself is pretty sleek in its design. You know, you've got the AF/MF switch, but otherwise, that's pretty much it. So let's jump into talking a little bit about the image quality, because of course, that is super important when talking about a new lens like this. Now, as you'd probably expect, a Sony prime lens, a G lens, this looks fantastic. Everything looks really nice and sharp, even shooting wide open at f1.8. Everything looks really nice and sharp. It's crisp. There's a really nice look to this lens. You know, I like the color. I like the contrast. There's a nice looking kind of bit of contrast with this lens, which I really, really like. And something that's actually really interesting with this lens, which I wasn't really expecting, obviously you have wide angle lenses, which are quite fast. So this is f1.8. Of course, the 24mm G Master one is f1.4. But you don't always necessarily expect them to have such a nice bokeh. You might use that fast aperture for low light shooting, but you don't necessarily expect it to have beautifully rendered bokeh, but that's exactly what this lens has, is the bokeh here is rendered so nicely, and I just didn't expect it to be the case because I don't expect it on wide angle lenses like that. But it looks really, really nice. And actually something that's going to be helpful with that is it does have a very close focusing distance. So it's 19 centimeters with autofocus turned on, or 18 centimeters with manual focus. And that's really close, especially for a wide angle like 20mm. That's really, really close, but it means you can get in nice and tight to subjects, to landscape, you know, have a really close foreground element. But having the f1.8 aperture, even stopping down a little bit at f2.8, the bokeh is rendered so beautifully in the background that it looks fantastic. Not something I expected to see, but very, very happy that it's in there. Now, obviously 20mm is great for things like landscape, cityscape, you know, a bit of architecture. You can get all kinds of different things actually with a wide angle like that. It's not crazy wide, like something like 14mm would be, but 20mm gives you a lot of room for how you want to shoot. And if you're shooting on something like the a7R4, there's a little bit of room to then crop in as well, so you can get a little bit tighter. But having that close focusing distance means you can experiment with things like portraiture, you know, probably more of an environmental portrait, but there's all kinds of things that you could actually experiment with. You know, street photography becomes an interesting thing, and because of the size of the lens, you can pop it on something like an a6400, which is not massive either, and have a pretty discreet setup for street photography. Of course, something else it's going to be useful for, along with that 24mm G Master, is astrophotography. Because it has such a fast aperture and a nice wide angle, it's going to be great for capturing massive, you know, wide views of stars and night landscapes. That's going to be fantastic for that kind of thing because it's going to be letting in so much light. Now, unfortunately, because we're in the UK, the weather's been terrible, obviously. Terrible cloud and rain. and wind. I mean, it's just all the time. So I haven't been able to test that out for astrophotography, unfortunately. But hopefully at some point I'll get my hands on it again, and we will have a break in the endless grey that is covering the country. Now, Sony have included their XD linear focus motors in this lens, which makes the autofocusing super fast and super accurate. I never had any issue. Now, to be fair, you don't probably expect to have much of an issue with the autofocus on a wide angle lens anyway, because generally speaking, you know, it's not so, you haven't got so much to choose from. You know, an 85mm, for example, you've definitely got very different layers for what you're focusing on. But with a 20mm, it's usually, I would think, a little bit easier. But because of that close focusing distance, I really got to test this out a little bit more. And absolutely, it just works. Now, again, to be fair, I would generally expect this from Sony at this point, because their autofocus is just so good. But absolutely works here. It works really, really well. And something that's really nice about these XD linear motors is it's super quiet as well. So video users, of course, you've got the declicker for your aperture, but also super quiet autofocus, which means that you could actually use the autofocus with this lens. However, if you do want to use manual focus, the actual manual focus ring feels nice. You know, it's very easy to turn, but there's just a hint of resistance there, which is what for me, which is always perfect. You know, it's just enough, you know, really nicely weighted. Ultimately, this is a really surprisingly versatile lens for a prime, for a 20mm prime lens, which you would normally use for things like landscape, you know, cityscape, maybe a bit of astro, stuff like that. But actually there's a lot you can do with this because of that super close focusing distance, because of that really beautiful bokeh as well. There's just a lot that you can achieve using just this lens. So I'm really, really impressed by it. Now, I'll pop a link to the actual lens down in the description so you can go and check it out for yourself, so you can go check out all of the details, all of the specs, loads of stuff. Of course, if you have any questions, pop them down in the comments below, and we'll get back to you ASAP. If you like the video, I always forget what comes next after that, but it's this. If you like the video, make sure to give it a thumbs up, because I always appreciate every single one of you who does that. That's always very appreciated. Make sure to subscribe as well if you're new. So we've got new stuff all the time. You know, we got tutorials, we've got reviews, we've got loads of stuff. I will of course see you in the next video. And as always, thanks for watching.